These things.
Stop. We've seen in the first three chapters the introduction and the letters to the seven churches. At this point, we see John in the spirit or in a vision, um, being invited into heaven through an open doorway. John is called up into heaven in verse 1. After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was like a trumpet speaking with me, saying, Come up here, and I will show you things which must take place after this. The reference to after these things, Revelations chapter 2 and 3 spoke to the churches, and the seven churches are understood to represent all churches. They were literally written to seven churches at the time, but they have been understood to include all churches up to including today. After Jesus was finished speaking to the churches, after these things, John experienced the vision of Revelation chapter 4. And the first voice which I heard, the first voice that spoke to John in Revelation 1:10, spoke to him again, the voice of Jesus. Jesus called John up to heaven through a door standing open in heaven. Where is heaven? We don't know except that it's up from where we are. It's up. The voice spoke loud and clear, the reference to being a trumpet. It was like the trumpet that gathered the congregation of Israel together, or the sound of a trumpet that gathers an army for battle. Come up here, and I will show you things which must take place after this. John will be shown things that concern the future, not John's present day. The context is that Jesus has written to the seven churches, describing their condition, commending them for their strengths, identifying their issues, and giving them a solution to the issues and encouraging them. But that's the present time. What follows after this is the future. Some like to interpret what John saw up through Revelation 19 as fulfilled in what took place before John's day, notably in the Roman invasion and the destruction of Jerusalem. Jesus clearly told John that he would show him things which must take place after this. So, while some hold that these are events that have already taken place, and they attribute some of these events to the Roman occupation and to the invasion, and ultimately to the destruction of Jerusalem, um, That is not the case. Clearly, he says after these things. Some like to interpret what John saw up through Revelations as fulfilled in history after John's day, but before our present day. But these events have yet to be fulfilled in any sort of literal sense. They can only be said to have been fulfilled by making them wildly symbolic. Therefore, we regard what Jesus will show John in the following chapters of Revelation as belonging to the future. Now, I'll pause for just a moment to point out the obvious. This was 2,000 years ago, 20 sets of 100 years. We are well into the future. So, what was in John's day a prediction of the future could be much closer than what we think. Therefore, we regard what Jesus will show John in the following chapters of Revelation as belonging to the future and as preceding the coming of Jesus on earth, what we call the millennial kingdom, the millennial reign. Many see John's going up to heaven as a symbol of the rapture of the church. John was called up to heaven by a voice that sounds like a trumpet, just as the church will be called up as described in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 16 and 17. Somebody turn there and read those two verses real quick. 1 Thessalonians 4, 16 and 17.
For the Lord himself will come down from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of an archangel, and with the trumpet call of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them on the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever.
We don't know if this is the case. It's being made by this particular Bible scholar that those two may be similar. John's call to come up into heaven sounds like the call that we will receive at the rapture. Jesus is quoted as saying, "Come up here," in Revelation. He is not quoted in the letter to the Thessalonians. It simply says, "with a loud shout." Now we can infer from that the shout will be, "Come up here." There will be a command that we should rise, and of course we will, but we don't know that. But this fellow is comparing the two, and it seems likely that that is the case between these two. We're probably getting a picture. What John experienced is likely what we will experience. He's doing the analogy. John is told a commandment to come up here. In Thessalonica, there's a shout. Whatever it is that's being said, we don't know, but probably it's reasonable to think, "Come up here." He will hear what sounds like a voice that sounds like a trumpet. The letter in Thessalonica says that they will hear a trumpet. Now, I take that to be literal. It probably will be the blast of a trumpet. Yes, sir.
Uh, verse,
Mhm.
first book, verse 10, it says, "I was in the spirit of the Lord's day and heard behind me a great voice of a trumpet."
It's going to be a commanding voice. It's going to be a very, very loud and clear voice. There's not going to be any mumbling or speaking under the breath. It's not going to be misunderstood. It'll be very, very, very clear
That was
what it says.
chapter 1, verse 10.
The reference that's given for our benefit is in a similar manner that a trumpet calls to gather the people, or at the sound of a trumpet that gives specific instructions to an army. There's no mistaking what the sound is telling you. Um, as I say it in Revelations, it's clear that it sounds like a trumpet. Whereas in that reference we looked at in the letter to the Thessalonians, it very well may be literally a trumpet blast that will be heard. It could be the voice saying, "Come up here," that is so loud and clear and sharp that it sounds like that blast of a trumpet, or it may be literally a trumpet. Uh, Once again, those are sort of the details that are not as significant. The fact is, by one means or another, a signal will be given that we will understand. The signal will be the sound of a blast of a trumpet or a loud voice, a shout that may say something like, "Come up here." At either rate, the two things will happen. There will be a very, very clear, unmistakable signal. We will hear it, we will understand it, and we will obey it. The pattern is significant. Jesus finished speaking to and dealing with the churches in Revelations in chapter 2 and 3, and all of the letters together represent instructions to all of the churches. Now, after dealing with the church, Jesus called John up into heaven, catching him away with a voice that sounded like a trumpet. All this happened before the great wrath that will be described at the beginning of Revelation chapter 6. As that great judgment on the earth unfolds, John, a representative of the church, is in heaven looking down on these events as they will take place on earth. It's a very strange situation. John is going to be looking at things that have not happened yet. How would we relate that to our own experience? Perhaps as we would watch a movie of some of an author's um, understanding of a future event, something that has not happened yet, but it will. John is going to be given literally a peep into the future to see things as they actually play out. Significantly, the word church never occurs in the chapters describing this period of judgment on earth. Nowhere in Revelations chapter 4 through 19 do you see the word church. Someone read. Yes, ma'am.
Invitation. He's taken, and he's in the spirit, he said, but it's taken to a particular place in heaven, not the whole thing, but just to the throne of God. It's because that's what we see from
It would
the
it would it
description,
would
not
appear.
to the, because when we see, we can look at what we see, the firmament, but this will be beyond the firmament, the
Correct.
throne of God.
This would appear to be the central. Let's use the word business district, because the CBD of heaven. This is the place of of uh, of the throne of God. Out of this throne, it comes the rainbows, lightnings, and thunderings, the colors of emerald and sapphire and amber. Uh, Immediately in front of this is a sea of a glassy sea like crystal, streets which are golden in appearance. Um, Creatures which we have never experienced on earth, called seraphim, and possibly other creatures that aren't even named. No, we're not seeing all of heaven. We're not seeing the gates and the walls, and we're not seeing the groupings of mansions. There's a tremendous amount of detail that we're not given. We're seeing literally the place where Christ is at.
Last week to read Exodus of this is a
The
symbol
description of the temple, yeah.
of what is the Son of God. And I think we're so familiar with John telling us that about the vision that he had. It's familiar with the temple that he used to see. I think so. Of
Yeah.
the cabin.
And of the tabernacle, the tent. So John goes up in the Spirit. Chapter 4, verse 2. Read, please.
Immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was standing in heaven, and one sitting on the throne.
Stop there. Some time ago, gosh, a year or so ago, we did a study on the book of Mark. And one of the things that I remember about the book of Mark was the immediacy of it, the urgency. The word immediately is used over and over and over in the book of Mark. Of course, Mark is a very staccato type of book. It goes just like that old Dragnet TV series, just the facts. He didn't spend a lot of time on details. He just went boom. Well, we see that word immediately used here. Immediately, I was in the Spirit. Jesus says, come up here, and immediately I was in the Spirit. There was the blink of an eye. That will be perhaps reminiscent of our translation when we go from a physical mortal body, whether we are still alive or whether we have deceased and we have become parts of the element of the earth again, whether ashes to ashes, dust has become dust, everything will regenerate again into precisely, exactly, identically what you see before you, but it will be a supernatural body. And that will be immediately, it's not going to be it's not going to be some process. It's not going to be something that's observable. It will be immediate. It will be, another word would be instantaneous. John, um, and another thing that I struggle with a little bit in this particular study, some of the commentators use the word vision. The scripture uses the word spirit. And we could get into a deep discussion about that, and some could have one idea and another could have another idea. I don't I don't know how to describe what I'm thinking. It's difficult for me to communicate what's behind my thought. I don't think this is a vision. I think literally, spiritually, John was in heaven. Now, his natural body himself is sitting in probably the entrance to a cave on a little bitty desolate island called Patmos in the Aegean Sea. But somehow there is a separation here. Spiritually, he is in heaven. It's not a vision. We see visions described differently than this is. Visions, generally, there's sort of a slow build-up, a process that goes to it. Um,
Something that we do with because also we study about Isaiah, Nehemiah, they also had Ezekiel, they also have these deep visions and Daniel dreams. And I was reading about that, how during the time, the life of people was guided by the people who have visions and dreams. But it got to an end. There is no more. We don't have visions and dreams on our time today. I don't think that is.
I'll leave this up to you to read and to meditate on it and decide for yourself. Visions are visions. Dreams are dreams. They're different words, they're different experiences. This seems to be a different experience from a dream or a vision. It is not said to be a vision. It is not said to be a dream. Immediately he said, I was in the Spirit. Now, go back to Revelations chapter 1:10. Chapter 1, verse 10.
Let's say, on the Lord's day, I was in the Spirit, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet.
All right, imagine, if you will, or follow me. This what for us now has been 4 months ago. We began our study of, not 4 months ago, we began in April. My goodness, how long ago was that? 6 months ago, 8 months ago. At the beginning of chapter 1, verse 10, John describes himself as being in the Spirit. Now, there at that point, he's introduced to Jesus. He sees 7 lampstands, Jesus holding 7 stars in his hand, and Jesus gives him the understanding and meaning of what that is, that this is the churches. Following that, Jesus dictates letters to John to individual churches. There's no time when John, during chapters 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3, is not in the Spirit. But something happens here that's different. He doesn't say, I was still in the Spirit. This seems to be an even more awesome experience, another level, if you will. And I'm just struggling here to somehow comprehend exactly what this means. But we go all the way back to chapter 1, verse 10, where John says, I was in the Spirit. Well, now here, immediately I was in the Spirit. So he seems to have sort of warp drived into another level. He's just taken a quantum leap forward into another level of being the Spirit. This is not a dream. It's not a vision. He's not in a trance. He's describing something different. And even in this difference, this describing himself as in the Spirit, this is different from the level of being the Spirit that he was in chapters 1 and 2 and 3. And the only way I can relate this is to think of rain. It's misting. If you stay out there long enough, you'll get wet. But it may take a long time because it's just a heavy fog. It's just misting. But then there is drizzle. You're not going to drown. You're going to get wet much faster, but it's certainly tolerable. But it's a heavier level. It's another level. And then to say that it's raining, or to say that it is a torrential downpour or tropical downpour, we understand that all of these cases would describe moisture, droplets of moisture falling in the atmosphere, and you'll get wet. But we clearly understand there are different levels of rain.
Mhm.
That heavy sort of fog, misty rain where you occasionally, intermittently have to use your windshield wiper, to that flap, 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 where you still can't see. Rain is rain is rain, right? In the Spirit, in the Spirit, in the Spirit. When we go to sleep at night, what do? We sleep. Well, no, the sleep experts say that there is light sleep and deep sleep, and there's something called REM, rapid eye movement sleep, and different things happen to you physically and mentally during these levels of sleep. Well, you're just asleep. To a person who observed you lying there on the couch, he's taking a nap. He's asleep. Well, no, an expert would say he's in a light stage of sleep, and these are the things, toxins are being released from muscles. Um, and no, he's in a REM level of sleep where muscles are being regenerated, oxygen is flooding into cells, et cetera, et cetera. Deep sleep is the one we get the least amount of at night, maybe only minutes, but that's the one that kind of helps to clear the mind. Am I making any sense here? I was in the Spirit, chapter 1, verse 10. I'm in the Spirit. Immediately I think he's just leaped into a whole new level of awareness.
When you said on the first chapter 110, he's in the Spirit, but he's in a different place where he see Jesus, and he said, it describes the place, it describes him. But now he's in the spirit again to another place.
Yeah, at chapter 1, where John is introduced to Jesus, or Jesus is introducing himself to John. Yeah, he's not in that place. Come up here. He's transitioning to another level uh, through an open doorway into heaven. Um, in that first event, is he in heaven? It would seem to be yes, because Jesus is there at this place. But he clearly transitions into another whole
It said there was
something.
an open door to the other place.
We're not given a whole lot of information. At chapter 1, verse 10, 11, 12, I didn't even realize that. Where exactly is he at? It's not made clear.
That's what I wanted to ask, because my Bible says I was in the spirit of the Lord's day.
On the Lord's Day, the day we call Sunday now, the first day of the week, he simply, to hit to such a level of detail, he tells you what day it is. On the Lord's Day, I was in the Spirit. Presumably, he's in prayer, he's in meditation, and then he hears a voice.
Yeah.
As of a trumpet.
As of a trumpet.
And this very, very sharp, very, very clear, very understandable voice said, I am Alpha and the Omega, the first and the last. But he doesn't say where he's at. Now, John, we never lose sight of the fact that John physically is probably at the entrance to a small cave, which provided him shelter.
My Bible says in the spirit, of 110 is in a state of spiritual ecstasy on the Lord's Day, likely not a reference to Sunday, which is called the first day of the week in the New Testament, but literally a Lordian day or an imperial day. The same adjective is used elsewhere only in 1 Corinthians 11:20, referring to the contents of the vision that reveal the future time when Christ will judge and rule.
That's using the word vision in reference to 1 Corinthians.
Right, 1 Corinthians 11:20.
Again, there is no reference to a vision here. It doesn't say that he was in a vision, it says he was in the spirit.
Right.
And as I say, perhaps that's one and the same, but I don't think so. John said immediately, I was in the spirit. This seems to be yet another experience as John came to heaven and a heavenly perspective. The phrase in the spirit causes us to ask, where was his body? Was John's body in heaven also, or was it just his spirit? This is impossible to know. Paul, when he had his heavenly experience, didn't know if he was in the body or not. That was 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 1 through 4. Let's look at that real quick. 2 Corinthians chapter 12.
I must go on Boston, although there is nothing to be gained. I will go on to visions and revelations from the Lord. I know a man in Christ who for 14 years ago was caught up in to the third heaven, whether it was in the body or out of the body. I do not know. God knows. And I know that these men, whatever in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise. He heard inexpressible things, things that man is not permitted to tell.
Paul's, of course, speaking of himself. He did not want to draw attention to himself. He wanted to relate the experience without seeming to be better than anybody else. He says, I knew a man more than 14 years ago. But Paul is very, very clear because he does it twice in two successive verses. Whether it was in the body or not, I don't know. I do not think, again, arguable. If you have your opinion, I don't think it will change. It won't have any effect on the context at all. It's just we're human beings. We like to have blanks filled in. Where was John at? Because there's no reference at all to his body, to him as a whole person being there. I have no reason to suspect that John was anywhere except the entrance to the cave that he used as a place of shelter from the elements on this desolate isle that he had been exiled to. So what difference would it make whether physical body or but there's nothing about this scripture that causes me to think John was physically present. And even Paul, in his case, where he didn't know whether he was actually there or whether he was there spiritually or whether this was a vision, he says himself, it really doesn't matter. God knows. Well, it doesn't make any difference. I'm telling you what I saw, what I heard, rather. No, actually, I guess I can't because it's not lawful for me to express what I heard. What I heard was, I don't have words for it. It's inexpressible. I don't have the vocabulary to communicate to you. I can't repeat back to you. I'm just telling you, boy, something awesome, not awful, but something awesome happened more than 14 years ago, and I'm never going to be the same again. John very clearly says, I was in the Spirit. So I have nothing about this scripture that causes me to think anything other than there is a separation of body and soul, or body and spirit. Now, I will tell you that we can get off on rabbit trails here. And here's one of but we're human. So I don't beat myself up when I think thoughts and wonder about things. If I'm right, and John is physically leaned up against the back of a rock, eyes closed, probably I keep saying the entrance to a cave for light. He's not ever how much of a cave it was. Well, the cave is still there, by the way. It's nothing, mystical about it. It's a tourist attraction. Here's the spot where John probably sat when he wrote Revelations. If your spirit leaves you, or if your soul leaves you, you have a dead body.
Yeah, you're dead.
There was one single breath difference in my sweet Kay and what was my sweet Kay. One single breath, because she was still there. Nothing had changed about her except her spirit was gone. Her soul was gone. The life force within her had departed, what Paul poetically described as a tent or an earthen vessel. There was not one single thing different. I had reason to have a conversation with some of my siblings. I happened to be present when my dad passed away, and he died with his eyes wide open. My aunt reached over and closed his eyes, but for some time you're in shock when you realize life has just left. He had the brightest blue eyes you've ever seen. I mean, they were slightly gray, but I mean, there was almost light to his eyes because they were just so bright. And the eyes were exactly the same, but the light behind them had gone out. And for the first time in my life, when I'm standing there looking into his eyes. It was the same eyes,
Yeah, I've heard this
but the
before.
light had gone out.
I've heard this before.
That was a few nights ago. My two of my sisters and I were
I
having a
dated
conversation.
someone that lost a child uh to something happened like almost like not like a crib death, but the baby was in a was live but mentally dead, like brain dead. And she told me that, when she was laying there watching her child in the hospital, hooked to respirators and everything, breathing for the baby, that occasionally the baby would open her eyes, but she could tell he was gone.
The light had
Because
gone out.
that's exactly the same thing that she said. She said you could tell the soul was gone because there was no light in the eyes anymore.
Well,
And that's the second time I've heard that. From you and her.
that conversation came up in a conversation my sisters had over. She made a comment that how did she say it? I don't wear grief well, as though it were a coat or a shirt that I would put on. She said, I don't wear grief well. And she further went on to say that in the past 3 years, of course, she lives in Alabama and I live here and we don't see each other, but every so many months, that the light has gone out in my eye. And I said, well, and that led us into that conversation. But as I say, that has nothing to do with nothing except that I'm human and I think about such things. If my understanding is right, then John is physically on the Isle of Patmos and his spirit is literally in heaven. This does not appear to be a dream, does not appear to be a vision. He says, immediately I was in the spirit. Now that may signify simply an awareness. I don't know. And ultimately, none of this affects the message itself. But it's interesting. If the spirit departed. Now, another thing, we can make an assumption that all of what we've spent months on and will probably spend many, many, many months on probably happened like that for John. It was probably the blink of an eye. He wasn't sitting there on that rock, leaned back against the cave wall for days or weeks or months. This download of information probably was virtually instantaneous.
Well, a dream.
It's a lot of detail.
Y'all probably know that I love to read. Well, I have an electronic library card. And so I can click on my library card and I can type in the name of the author or the name of the character. And up comes all this list of books that he's written that took him weeks or months to write. And it might take, unless you're really dedicated to reading full time, but if you read just in little snatches of time here and there, it might take you several weeks to read. It downloads on my computer from the library server to my phone in a split second. Whole book.
Really?
Hundreds of pages of information downloads in about 1 second. I have to assume that the one who gave us the gift of inventiveness to come up with supercomputers
Knowledge.
has at least that capacity. My assumption is that Revelations was downloaded to John probably in the blink of an eye. And it took him no telling how long to write it down, what he's experienced. But along with that download, he has perfect recall of every word, of every sight, of every sound. I doubt that John was, sitting there for days or weeks, propped up against the wall in suspended animation, not needing food or drink or exercise. Uh, I suspect, and this is just me, but if we can download a book in 1 second, how long would it take God to download the book of Revelation? I can download the book of Revelations to my phone in approximately 1 second. To say one Mississippi, it's done. It's on my phone. It's there.
I think often, just like sitting here now, we're talking about, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, does it make a sound? It's not there. Does it make a sound? That's just like if you dream of something, are you in the spirit? If nobody's actually there to see that you're making sounds or anything, are you spiritually out of body or just subconsciously? It's a dream.
As I say, we can have various ideas and might be right, might be wrong. At the end of the day, it falls in the category of curiosity, our wonder.
Yeah.
But
Like I-
none of that affects the outcome of the message.
It's like,
And that's where we want to be. We want to be very, very careful.
it's like I wonder, like the human brain, that you only use a third of what your brain is capable of. And is the rest of that reserved for what we're going to see and take in our afterlife? That's something that I wonder.
In a similar manner, there are folks who prefer, for example, in the in the in the singing portion of our praise and worship service, reaching into the pew behind them and pulling out a hard-backed hymnal. And the song director says, turn to hymn number 325
Right.
as we sing Victory in Jesus. Piano gives the prelude, and then we all begin to sing together. That is a very traditional style of others, like ourselves. We tend to use technology, shoot it up on the wall. We don't have the books, but simply read it, the lyrics to the song off the screen. But some folks don't like that at all. And there are others who have live musicians who sing or direct the music. We're talking about the means of presenting it, the style. What we need to focus on is the message. It's not whether it's in a book or it's projected on the screen. What does it say? Is this consistent with the gospel? Is it consistent with the Bible? Is this edifying? Is it uplifting? Is it encouraging? Is it convicting? What is the message? A young man at one of the enterprises, one of the car preps, come up to me and he said to me, and I've shared this with you before in another class. He came up behind me and he said, "You're one, aren't you?" And I'm going, well, possibly. What exactly? He said, "You're a Christian." He said, "I can tell by how you work, how you speak, how you conduct yourself." So, I'm going, oh, well, yeah. He said, "Can I ask you something?" He said, "I'm a youth minister at our church." And he said, I'm using rap music for our young people. What do you think? Is that okay? I said, "Son, I'm going to tell you, it's not my style of music. It's not my taste. But that doesn't matter. It's the message. Listen to every single word that's being said. If it's consistent with the Bible, if it brings praise and honor and glory to God."
It does.
We're talking about style.
Some do.
We're talking about style.
Exactly.
Paul said, to the rich, I'll be as a rich person, to the poor as a poor, to the educated, educated, to the uneducated as uneducated, if so by any means someone might be saved. I don't care for rap music,
They have
but
Christian
if
rap.
you are
They have Christian
if
rap.
you are rapping the
About
gospel
God.
of Jesus Christ and it is true, then all for it. Now, to give you the rest of the stories, Paul Harvey used to say a few months later, he came back, he said, Mr. John, I was just going to tell you, he said, you remember the conversation about rap music? He said, that had to go because it wasn't. He said, I listened to what you said. It wasn't consistent with the gospel. He said, it had to go. And we're doing something different now. I said, well, let everything be measured by the Bible. It's the only mirror that matters. If you can't see rap music in the Bible, then get rid of it. If you can't see that hymnal in the Bible, then get rid of it. If you can't see what's being projected on the Bible, get rid of it. But if it speaks to your community, if it speaks to your congregation, and it's speaking the message of Jesus Christ, then by all means, do it. But as I say, whether John is in a dream or it's a vision, or whether he is physically bodily in heaven, none of this really matters. It's just the curiosity of our minds. What we want to not lose sight on is the message. The point of focus here in chapter 4, verse 2, he said, immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne set in heaven, and one, capital O, one sat on the throne. The point of focus of this whole experience is the throne of heaven. And behold, a throne set in heaven, and one who sat on it. This throne was what first impressed John. I mean, of everything that he's seeing, wouldn't you? Lightning is coming out of this, not around it or above it or behind. Lightning, big bolts of electricity are proceeding from this chair, and thunder is booming, and there's what appears to be a rainbow emanating from it, and the color of an emerald. My goodness, that centerpiece is what John first looks at, and it got his attention. It is the centerpiece. John fixated on the occupied throne, and everything else is described in relation to this throne. The bottom line of atheism or materialism is that there is no throne. There is no seat of authority or power that the entire universe must answer to. The bottom line of humanism, excuse me, is that there is a throne, but man sits on it. Essentially, man cannot live without the concept of a throne, a supreme ruler. So if man dethrones God, he will inescapably place himself or some other man on the throne, perhaps a political leader, as was the case with the dictators Lenin, Stalin, and Mao. They envisioned themselves to be the supreme leader. They envisioned themselves to be God. The throne is not empty. There is someone who sits on this great heavenly throne. The throne is a powerful declaration of not merely God's presence, but of his sovereignty, his rightful reign, and his prerogative to judge. We cannot rightly think about much of anything else until we settle in our mind that there is an occupied throne in heaven, and the God of the Bible rules from that throne. While there may be many differing interpretations, the fundamental truths are self-evident. At the center of everything is an occupied throne. Yeah, excuse me. Cut grass the last 2 days and sucked up a lot of dust, I guess, but it didn't bother me at all till I got here. Then I started sneezing and coughing.
That's the way I do when I mow grass, is to take two load out and start coughing and everything.
So, Revelations chapter 4, someone please read verse 3.
and the one who sat there had an appearance of jasper and carnelian. A rainbow resembling an emerald encircled with them.
What John saw at this heavenly throne, he who sat there was like a jasper and a sardis or cornelian stone. And there was a rainbow around the throne in appearance like an emerald. John described the occupant of the throne. He did not describe a distinct figure. Interestingly enough, it did not say that he had long white hair or a flowing white beard, that he was dressed this way or that way. He gave colors. He gave colors. He did not describe the figure. There is here no description of the divine being, so as to point out any similitude, shape, or dimensions. The description rather aims to point out the surrounding glory and the effulgence than the person of the Almighty King. The fact is, no man has ever seen God.
Well, my description it says jasper is clear as crystal, sardis is blood red, and emerald is light green.
Sardis is probably the what we call ruby today,
Yeah.
But
or
what
carnelian. The carnelian, another word. It's probably ruby, what we call ruby today. Now,
Yeah.
there has been one man who has seen God, Adam. There's another one who was face to face with him, caused him to glow in the dark to the extent that he had to wear a veil over his face because it was so distracting to people. It wasn't something that was going to affect you, but it took away from the message by just being so taken aback by the fact that this man's skin is glowing.
He saw the back, but not the facial, but the back of the
Moses was face to face with God when
That's what I was
he
gonna
gave the Ten Commandments, but did not see him. We know this because of the brilliance of the light that actually caused Moses' skin and hair. His hair turned white, beard turned white, and his skin literally glowed for years afterwards. As I say, Moses, after that, wore a veil only because the glowing of his skin was a distraction. Listen to what I'm saying. Don't pay attention. Don't look at my face. Listen to what I'm saying. There was one other person whose such close proximity was Elijah. And excuse me if I get this wrong. I always confuse Elijah and Elisha. But God says, get in the crack of this rock, and I will cover you up with my hand as I pass by. No one has seen God. And so we get a little excited here. John is in the throne room. We're about to at least get a description of him. No. What is evident is the brightness and the glowing of the colors representative of his glory. He is within the light. He is the light, but we don't have he appeared to be about 5'7". He was either of this nationality, appeared to be of that nationality. He's not described as being Jewish. He's not described as I say jokingly, with long white beard, long white hair.
He's not even described as a human being.
He's not described at all. He's described simply as these are the colors which I see emanating from that throne.
JD, there is a verse in the Bible that he described him. It's saying that he is the light, and nobody has approached him. I'm trying to look for the verse in the Bible. He's in a place that nobody can access because of the brightness.
Um, John doesn't describe a specific form or figure. John describes emanations of glistening light and uses two colors, jasper and sardis or cornelian. And here's our modern way of thinking about that. The jasper, how did somebody, Roger, did you read it saying that it is a crystal clear?
Clear. Clear as crystal.
It's Paul writing this who said, who alone is immortal and who lives in unapproachable light, whom no one has seen or can see him, conceive. To him be honor and might forever. Amen. And he's talking about God. He's in this place. Nobody, no human can access to this.
Exactly.
And then for John to see it, he has to be in the spirit, not in a physical.
Not in a physical. The best guess, if you wanted to put words like jasper and carnelian or sardis into modern languages, what we're looking at here is a light coming from the throne itself, which was of greenish color, which we would think of emerald. Of course, over this whole area is what appears to be the 7 colors of the rainbow. The figure emanate at the center of this would appear to be producing, appear to be jasper. The description is a crystal clear. What we think that is diamond. Today, jasper is what we would think of as diamond, and sardis or cornelian to be ruby. So what we're looking at is a scene of just intense light, unlike anything that John has ever seen. He identifies a throne, which appears to be emerald, is emanating green light. Out of this green light is flashing lightning, and thunder is produced from the lightning flashes. The throne itself would appear to be emerald in color. The one who sat on the throne appears to be diamond and ruby. We have no description of the one on the throne other than the light that is emanating from this area. Now remember, above this area we have seraphim who continually day and night are calling out to one another, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was, who is, and who is to come.
About women that, but you know, but I will mention 2 things. Daniel saw in a vision, and he called he called the one who sit on the throne, the ancient of days. And the other thing I want to mention to you is about reading in Exodus, like he told us to read, how the cherubims were also in on the curtains that they have, and they have to embroider on the material that they was covering the Ark of the Covenant. I was so surprised about that because nobody can see that place. That was the holy place
Right.
to go in. And it said that it was surrounded. It was on the curtains that they have cherubims. It was there.
That reference back to Exodus relates to these colors that we're seeing. There are 2 thoughts: the diamond and the ruby. There are 2 thoughts that may they're just thoughts. They may or may not be God's thoughts. Perhaps these 2 colors are meant to communicate one or the other of 2 events. One would be the glory of the empty tomb, white, Matthew 28, 1-3, and the sacrificial love of Calvary, red, indicating Christ's shed blood. Or, here's the other thought that some of the Bible scholars have, perhaps they're linked with the first and the last gems and the high priest breastplate. The first gem is a diamond. The last gem of the 12 stones is a ruby. Jesus says, I am the first, the diamond, and I am the last, the ruby. That's found, the descriptions of the high priest breastplate is found in Exodus chapter 39, verses 8 through 3.
Exodus 15 through 29, the description of the breastplate is a square piece of beautiful material folded in half and open at the top like a pouch, and placed over the front of the ephod. It was adorned with 12 precious stones in 4 rows, on which were engraved the name of the 12 tribes.
We will stop. Much more to look at. We're going to look next at the rainbow. Exodus, I think 39:8. Was it 38? Exodus 38 or 39.
For the rule of the yeah. In the first row was a ruby, a topaz, and a beryl. In the second row, the turquoise, the sapphire, and the emerald. In the third row, the zinc, and agate, and my first name, this. The fourth row, a chrysolite, and an onyx, and a jasper. Okay, the jasper is the last, and the ruby is the first.
We're going to stop, but let me leave you with one thing to think about. The next thing we're going to consider is that overarching the throne of God is what? A rainbow.
A rainbow. And
Where have we seen rainbows before? This is Revelations. If you go all the way back to Genesis, we have a rainbow. And what is the rainbow? God's commitment to himself, a promise that he made to himself. I'm never going to destroy them in this way again. This is related to the end of the flood, where all of humanity was wiped out except one family. And he says, I won't do it with water again. He doesn't commit to not destroying them, because ultimately, when we get a little farther into Revelation, he destroys us with fire. Next time, the whole earth is going to be consumed in a fireball. But the rainbow is evident of God's commitment to himself. There's a promise that he made, and it's like, if you want to, if you want to have a goal and you want to stick to your goal, then, put it on a sticky note and put it on the dashboard of your car. Put it on the refrigerator. If it has something to do with food, put it on the refrigerator. Stop and think first. God literally has a post-it note over his throne in his office. There's a big note that says, not going to do that again. Rainbows are more than just pretty colors.